Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Martin, and I've just recently moved to McGill, but today I'm going to be talking about some of the work I did at Western University with Dr. David Sherry. So if my slides don't match the program, that's why. To start us off, I'm going to talk about food caching, which is simply the process of storing food in the present for recovery and consumption in the future. It's widespread, though we see it mostly in birds and mammals. And it's incredibly variable in a number of ways, but notably in dispersal strategy, duration, in cache site or cache location, and in the number and type of items cached. Now, I like to look at caching as a timeline. Resources are acquired, deposited, left for some period of time, and then subsequently retrieved. This, of course, is simplified, but typically it does the trick. Looking at caching this way also allows us to easily map behaviors onto one or more of these phases and lets us ask questions about how the different phases of caching might interact. For example, if an item is cached, it becomes subjected to all kinds of environmental threats. And these threats can influence behaviors in other phases, namely cache retrieval, cache deposition, and of course, in resource acquisition. Of particular interest for this talk are cache robbers, individuals that steal caches made by others, and how the perceived risk of cache pilferage can influence cache deposition. Of course, to do this kind of work, we need a focal species, and for me, this is the Canada jay. Canada jays are residents of the North American boreal forest. They're long-term scatter hoarders, and they're reliant on cached food to survive the winter. And this last piece is important because if they're reliant on cached food to survive the winter, then the viability of their caches when they go to retrieve those caches is important. Additionally, since we're going to talk about cache robbing and cache defense strategies, we need a robber. And for us, this is the blue jay. Why blue jays? Well, their range overlaps with Canada jays, and they occupy a similar foraging niche. And most importantly, blue jays steal Canada jay caches in the wild. Today, when I talk about blue jay, or I say blue jay, what I'm referring to is a taxidermied jay paired with an audio playback. And we did this in order to control gaze, activity, and attentiveness of the potential pilferer. With this in mind, we wanted to address two different questions. The first, do Canada jays alter cache site selection in response to perceived risk? And the second, are movement behaviors altered by this perceived risk? And as I mentioned previously, this work was done at the Advanced Facility for Avian Research at Western University in the observation suites that we have there. So here we have a three-part suite, and we'll focus only on the flight and observation rooms today. So the flight room is essentially a large open room that can be configured any way we want for particular questions. And importantly, it can be viewed through one-way glass from the observation room, allowing us to score in real time. In this study, there are three things of note in the flight room. The first are the trees. So there are 2 white spruce trees provided to afford lots of potential caching locations for the birds. And these trees were as identical as we could make them, and they were switched back and forth to make sure that it wasn't a tree preference that we were seeing for cache location. Second, the jay stand where the model blue jay was presented. And that's on the top right of the flight room. And lastly, the removable screen. And what's really important about this setup is that when the removable screen was in place, tree 1, the bottom tree, was entirely hidden from the blue jay's sightlines, or what would have been the blue jay's sightlines. So tree 1 was entirely hidden when the screen was in place. And by mixing and matching the presence absence of the screen and the jay, we were able to create 4 contexts, each with their own distinct risk level. So first, we have the control context, no risk, there's no blue jay, no screen, no threat. We have a high risk threat. This is robber open, where all the sites are visible to the blue jay. We have the robber hidden, a partial risk context, where only tree 2 is visible to the blue jay. And finally, we have a motivational control, where there is no robber threat, but the screen is in the room to ensure that it doesn't affect the behavior of the Canada jays by itself. So with that, we wanted to ask our first question. Do Canada jays alter their cache site selection in response to some perceived risk? And right away, what we see is that Canada jays decrease their overall caching behavior when cache robbers are present and visible. And this is important to note because we can see in context 2, when all of the sites were visible, Canada jays depressed their overall caching behavior significantly. However, when the blue jay was present, but there was a safe option, a hidden out of sight location for the jays to cache, then the Canada jays returned to pre-cache pilfering levels. And so we wanted to look more closely at this to confirm our suspicion that the jays are exploiting this out of sight tree. And they certainly are. So we're looking at proportion of caches in trees 1 in blue and 2 in green. And what's important here is the third context. That shaded bar shows when the jay is present, but that tree is hidden. And you can see that upwards of 80% of caches in that context, regardless of individual, were placed in that hidden tree. So that confirms our suspicions that the jays are evaluating risk and that they're modulating their caching behavior accordingly, which is pretty interesting. We also wanted to look at the movement behaviors, how the birds moved around the room, and whether that was altered by this perceived risk. And right away, sort of a global look at it, we would suggest no. Canada jays split their time evenly between all trees. So that's the blue bar, tree 1, and the green bar, tree 2. We're not too concerned with the red bar here. But if we look a little bit more carefully, and we look specifically at that third context, and instead of just looking at overall duration of visits, we look at how frequently the birds were going to a location and how long they were staying there per visit, we see something a little more interesting. And that is that the birds visit the hidden tree more frequently, that's the red box on your left, but for less time, the red box on your right. And so we suggest that it's possible that these birds are using their spatial position as another means of some sort of cache defense. Basically, go to the tree where you're caching when you need to manage your caches, but otherwise stay as far away as possible and avoid detection. So what to take away? Well, perceived risk certainly informs decisions about where to cache food, resulting in different cache protection strategies that are dependent on risk. Where you cache your food is entirely dependent on your perceived risk. We also suggest that visual information seems essential to risk evaluation, which is a little bit different than things we've seen in other corvids in some similar experiments, and that's kind of interesting. And we suggest that spatial position seems like it might play some role in cache defense as well, but this needs further investigation before we can draw any real conclusions. With that, I'd like to thank Dr. David Sherry, who's my co-author on this particular project, and a number of other people without whose support this would not have been possible. And if it is possible, I will take any questions, or you can reach out to me on Twitter at jeffmartin_17, or by email at jeff.martin7@mail.mcgill.ca. Thank you.